Welcome to Professor Hemlock's study. Today, I want to bring you guys a first video in what I'm hoping might be a series here. I call it the Keys to Performance series, and this I kind of want to start doing every week, where we go over what are the best ways to maximize performance in this week's affixes as Arcane specifically. So I also, kind of want to let everyone know I did it. I did it. Keystone Master exclusively as Arcane and exclusively through pugging groups. I did no pre-made groups to achieve Keystone Master as Arcane. So let's dive in. Let's dive into today's subject for this week. So first off, let's talk about forming your group composition. So if you're using your key, which I highly recommend, do not be afraid to use your key. It's easiest to get into groups, obviously, when you're the one forming the groups. You can also ensure that you're having an optimal group composition for yourself as Arcane, which is very important because a lot of groups will expect you to be fire. And when you go into a group as Arcane, they may not understand that you are kind of a soft melee caster, is how I would put it. So when forming your group composition for Arcane, you want to think of, okay, let's see. When I'm going to be in this week, we have with the lovely storming week. So with storming, it's these little tornadoes are going to spawn around you when you're in melee range of the mobs. So a lot of the time, this means that since we're going to be doing Arcane Explosion spam and our tank's already in melee range, the more people that are in melee range, the more tornadoes that spawn in melee range, and that'll mean we're most often going to end up having 3, 4 tornadoes in melee range, and that can start to be very, very overwhelming, where you're just constantly getting booped up. The tank is constantly getting booped as well, and they do a minor amount of damage, but it is noticeable amount of damage, especially when you're pugging groups with healers that may be a little less comfortable with major group healing. So that's something to be aware of, right? An ideal composition is actually going to be a caster cleave for us this week, with other casters that are long ranged. Things like Warlocks, especially. Warlocks could be great this week. Destruction, specifically, getting its recent buff, could be a great teammate for you. And Health Stones are obviously very beneficial to a group. But generally, since you're already melee and you're going to have a tank that's going to be melee, try to avoid recruiting any other melee for your groups. Something else that's going to change as well is our AOE rotation needs to be a little bit more precise. So when you're going into this AOE rotation, I kind of set it up here for us. We want to make sure that we have about 18 yards of distance, or as maximal distance as possible, when we're going into it with a traditional big AOE rotation. So if we're going into this with a Touch of the Magi open, Touch of the Magi Barrage, Orb Barrage, Shifting Power, Orb Barrage, right? That would be the traditional AoE rotation opener. We really want to make sure that we are at maximum range. So if our tank is in here and our tank is spawning tornadoes and they're whirling around the mobs, and we're back here, we're not going to get hit by those tornadoes as much, but we want to stay in range of that shifting power ability at 18 yards. So we're maximizing that damage output while staying out of range of that. And of course, after we've done our big one, our big AoE go, and we need to go into an Arcane Explosion, then we're forced to go back into melee range. But one of the worst things you can have happen this week is getting booped on shifting power. You really, 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 really have to be aware this week of, okay, I'm in my AoE rotation. Try to focus on doing the right rotation, of course. But when you are having tornadoes spinning around you, you need to ensure that you can get that full shifting power off. Not only is that going to throw off your AP CD, that's going to throw off your orb. You're going to lose a ton of DPS because you're losing out on insane amounts of cooldown reduction. So that is something you got to be very careful with. When you're seeing tornadoes fly around you, you are staying at maximum range, and save shifting power if you are unable to ensure that you cannot get hit by a tornado. So that's a very, very important part here. The next thing in our week here that I kind of want to go over is inspiring. So essentially what these inspiring mobs will do is they make everything around them unable to be crowd controlled. And inspired mobs can be crowd controlled. So you kind of have two options here. So you as a mage can crowd control the inspired mob, and then your group can then kill off the entire other pack of the mobs. Or you can single target rotation down the inspired mob, then go to an AOE rotation. In pugging, most often, you'll be doing the second one. So you're going to be pulling the whole group together, and on inspired mob packs, do not go into an AOE rotation. These inspired mobs will make it so every other mob can't be CC'd in any form. No stuns, no kicks, nothing, right? So since they're essentially going to become a lot stronger and a lot more able to deal a bunch of damage to your group, you need to single target down the inspired mobs first. So single target them down and then go into a traditional AOE rotation. And then things are gonna start dying a lot quicker. Of course, if you are familiar with the tank and you like have a group you like to run with, polymorphing the inspired mob, assuming that it is a polymorphable target, or having someone else in the group throw a crowd controlling effect onto the inspired mob, then AoEing down the pack and single targeting down the inspired mob is your other option. Both of them are fine. Neither is going to be specifically better than the other. Depending on your group composition, things can kind of change there, but the big thing is inspired mobs need to either be CC'd or die first. Very important. Do not just try and use your AoE rotation on those inspired mob packs. Okay. The next one is Fortified Week here. So I kind of want to go over Fortified Week and just some generic, like, okay, it's Fortified Week. What does that mean, right? So since trash mobs have a bunch more health, right? And they're going to be doing a lot more damage. So this means Time Warp can kind of be utilized differently than you would in a traditional dungeon, right? So say we're doing a key and it's a 30-minute timer on the key, right? If I can get 3 uses, or it's a 35-minute key, right? And I can get 3 uses of Time Warp instead of 2, like Plaguefall is kind of an example of this, right? Where there's quite a bit of time between the first boss, where you would traditionally use Time Warp, and the first pack. So do you need Time Warp for the first boss on Plaguefall with a Fortified Week? You don't. You simply don't. So if you're able to Time Warp the first pull, and then Time Warp 2 more times on really effectively large trash packs, you're going to be able to clear the dungeon a lot faster, because bosses on Fortified Week are not going to be what's holding you up, especially because most often you're still going to have Prideful for those bosses. Since you're going to have Prideful anyways most often for the bosses, you don't need Time Warp. And if you're pulling an extremely large pack on Fortified Week, you're able to down them faster. That's going to be what's going to, be the difference between time a key and not timing a key, because of how much health mobs have. So do coordinate with your group first if you're pugging. Let everyone know that you're going to warp on bigger trash pulls, specifically your tank. Hey, tank, double pull the open in this dungeon. Halls of Atonement is a great dungeon where you can triple pull in the open. Plaguefall, great dungeon. The other side, and almost every dungeon in reality can have a double or triple pull on Fortified Week in the opener, where you can utilize Time Warp and effectively get another extra bonus use of Time Warp, which can make this Fortified Week feel a lot smoother and a lot cleaner, okay? And kind of what's tied into this, with not just Time Warp, think about this for your Arcane power as well, right? So if we're using major DPS cooldowns, do I need to have major DPS cooldowns up for every single boss fight? Not really, right? Especially in Fortified Week, what's going to make or break a key is wiping on trash. And if we're able to output a ton more DPS in those trash packs by utilizing AP more often, or as often as possible on trash packs, then we're going to be able to put out a higher total level of DPS and able to kill packs of mobs faster, which will time a key faster. And this kind of goes hand in hand with pairing into a group comp, right? since Arcane Mages have an extremely high amount of AOE DPS and a little bit on the lower side of single target DPS. If we're picking our group comp and we pick like a Warlock I kind of listed earlier, a Warlock is a great example of someone who makes up for your weaknesses. Not only is it a caster that's going to be out of tornado range, but it's also going to be a caster with high single target DPS and not as good of AoE DPS as you, right? So we kind of synergize really well with each other. You can make up a large amount of AoE damage, and the Warlock can help you in the single target issues when you do get to boss fights, especially on dungeons like Theater of Pain, where there is a lot of bosses and not a lot of big trash pulls. So that is something that can be a really big help, having another class that is great at single target DPS and to make up for you. And that kind of ties back into the using arcane power. So if I'm able to have a 35-minute key and every 2 minutes I'm using AP, I'm going to be able to not only have extremely high overall DPS because I'm utilizing AP as much as possible, but on this week, as far as Fortified goes, we're able to maintain killing the most important or most difficult part of those mobs. So always use AP as much as possible on Fortified weeks. Do not worry too much about holding your AP for boss fights. And finally this week, I want to kind of round it out with my favorite discussion, which is defensive use. Defensive use is something that I see even in keys in the 15 to 17 range, people not doing enough. It's very rare that I am not the very bottom damage taken on a key I run, simply because I'm actually utilizing my defensive abilities. And as Arcane, we have extremely spiky damage, right? So like we open with AP and a bunch of damage right off the bat, where even other specs have a little bit more of a setup time to their damage, where they have to use their cooldowns or build energy, or like Fire Mages is build Ignite. So for us, it's just wham, cooldowns, massive amounts of DPS, really spiky stuff. And we don't have like what Hunters have when they have the ability to direct some of their threat to the tank. So it is extremely important to utilize those defensive abilities because you're going to be using AP aggressively on Fortified Week, using it as much as you can on every pull. Mirror images, I mean, honestly, it's a 2-minute cooldown. It's going to not line up perfectly with AP because of the CD reduction if you're running the conduit for clear cast missiles. But every time you have mirror images up, you pop it at the beginning of the pull, your threat's going to not be as high because you're going to have something to take a blow for you if you need to. I can't tell you the amount of times that I have personally forgotten to use mirror images on an AP pull. I got aggro, boom, melee slapped for 20,000, and I'm dead. So big oof, we do not want to do that. Utilize your mirror image as much as possible. I mean, if you're thinking of using AP as much as possible, mirror images should be its best buddy. It's tied together. Every time you're using AP, look to that mirror image. Is it off cooldown? Smash that button. And if mirror images is not on cooldown, we have greater invisibility. Greater invisibility is a huge saving ability for our threat and damage taken as well. So say you open with your big AP go, you're 2 or 3 globals in, and you are like you're topping the meters by a massive amount. This is an indicator that you're probably going to pull aggro, or you see that lovely little high threat sign over the mob's heads, right? Just invis. It's 1 global, and then you instantaneously hop out of invis. You do not need to stay invis for any amount of time. You just literally pop it. So if I'm doing a hard opener, I'm Touch of the Magi, AP, I've gotten through my big damage. I got an orb out. I got a barrage out. I've gotten through some of my AOE rotation. I'm going to smash invis right there when I'm at my peak DPS. And then it'll lower that threat all the way down to nothing. You have a damage reduction coming with that as well when you come out of invis. So still, just in case you get hit by an AoE or there's some type of other mechanic or you get hit by a tornado, you're going to take a lot less damage. And on top of that, you're not going to have any threat. So defensives. If your healer has to work less, you're going to be able to time keys better. And that is my summary for this week on our Fortified inspired Tornadoes and Prideful week. I want to thank everyone for watching and coming to Professor Hemlock's study. If you have any questions, as always, please pop on into the chat, ask me. I'm more than happy to answer, and we'll see everyone next time.